Hi, everybody.
Hi.
So we are, it's funny I said hi, but we just chatted for 10 minutes, and because I started the recording, I had to say hi again. So it sounded like it's the we are going through the minor prophets, the 12 minor prophets, and we finished Hosea last week, which was a pretty interesting one. And we are going to read, I don't know if we'll read all of Joel, but we'll read at least some of Joel, maybe all of Joel. And it's I know I probably say this to everyone, it's an interesting book. One of the things that's, so the minor prophets, which are the ones we're reading now, the Old Testament isn't technically chronologically written, but it kind of is. It wasn't meant to be chronologically written. It was meant to be put into types of books, basically. But those books are fairly chronological in the life of the people. So you have the Torah, the history, which is sort of the section right after the Torah. Then you've got poetry, and you've got major prophets. I'm missing a section. And then you got minor prophets. For the most part, they sort of, at least within the sections, they're chronological. And the minor prophets were some of the later ones. But Joel there's almost no historical references. You know, with a lot of the other ones, we kind of can follow. Like Hosea, there was a lot about the Assyrian invasion of the people of the Holy Land, and a lot of comment, if you remember, a lot of comments about Ephraim, which was the tribe in between Judah and Israel, which by the time of Jesus doesn't exist anymore, but there's a lot of talk about them siding with the Assyrians, and even mentions the Assyrians. So it was really easy to date Hosea within a certain time period. Joel doesn't have that. So it makes it a little bit trickier to date. Somewhere between, my book says somewhere between the 9th and 4th centuries BC, which is a pretty broad area. So knowing, of course, our one of our famous dates, 586 BC, when the temple is destroyed, there aren't any references to the temple being destroyed or to the people being put into captivity in Babylon, which normally you would expect by something in that time. But but scholars think anywhere, that's a pretty broad area. The Assyrian invasion time, the war with Assyria, is 8th century BC, so even possibly before that, going up to much more modern times biblically. So it's a little bit different because of that. A lot of them have some obvious allusions to people. There are some historical references to things. There's some connections, references to the book of Obadiah, references to a couple other things that could be connected with historical things that are referencing other prophets' books, but that doesn't mean that it came before or after. I mean, we don't know. That doesn't help us that much. So one of the things that's unique about Joel is that it connects natural and human events. Lines like the darkened sun and stars, the moon turned to blood, the pouring out of divine spirit on all flesh prior to the judgment of the nations. It implies sort of an apocalyptic message in a lot of places, but it's very poetic, very kind of vivid imagery in spot. Somebody got mail.
I did. It'll wait.
So it's being apocalyptic, which is not normally my favorite type of biblical scripture. because it just feels so, for me, apocalyptic literature feels like, we don't know the hour of the day, but let me tell you all about the hour and day it's going to look like. And I'm like, ugh, you know,
Yeah.
but with Joel, it feels okay that you're hearing that, because it's there's a lot of imagery attached to it, which is beautiful in its own way, beautiful and terrible, I guess, in its own way. So terrible in the good point of the word, terrible, yeah, like things being destroyed and the world being made new, but in some kind of poetic ways. So I was saying earlier, it's a pretty short book, but we'll see. I think it'll probably take us 2 weeks to read it. We'll see where we end up. So the first chapter. Oh, forgot one more thing. There's it mentions, my note mentions the word of the Lord, the name of the Lord, Yahweh, is mentioned several times in this book. And Yahweh is an interesting word, because it's for some Jewish scholars, they don't use the vowels to make it unpronounceable, in deference, respect for God. So it's often spelled YHWH, and in this, apparently in the Hebrew, that's how it's written here. So when you see the Lord or God, that kind of word, it's often written in Hebrew as Yahweh. I don't know if it ever says actually Yahweh in the thing, but that to have that sort of traditional way of writing the name of God is sort of, it happens in other places, but Joel was very, very consistent with that, which is kind of an interesting thing. So the word of the Lord that came to Joel, son of Pethuel. Hear this, O elders, give ear, all inhabitants of the land. Has such a thing happened in your days, or in the days of your ancestors? Tell your children of it, and let your children tell their children, and their children another generation. What the cutting locust left, the swarming locust has eaten. What the swarming locust left, the hopping locust has eaten. And what the hopping locust left, the destroying locust has eaten. Wake up, you drunkards, and weep, and wail, all you wine drinkers, over the sweet wine, for it is cut off from your mouth. For a nation has invaded my land, powerful and innumerable. Its teeth are lion's teeth, and it has the fangs of a lioness. It has laid waste my vines and splintered my fig trees. It has stripped off their bark and thrown it down. Their branches have turned white. Lament like a virgin dressed in sackcloth for the husband of her youth. The grain offering and the drink offering are cut off from the house of the Lord. The priests mourn, the ministers of the Lord. The fields are devastated, the ground mourns. For the grain is destroyed, the wine dries up, the oil fails. Be dismayed, you farmers, wail, you vine dressers, over the wheat and the barley. For the crops of the field are ruined. The vine withers, the fig tree droops. Pomegranate, palm, and apple, all the trees of the field are dried up. Surely joy withers away among the people. I thought it was the verse with the locusts, I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
It's kind of like each time the locust comes through, it destroys, the different types destroy just a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah. It mentions in verse 6, a nation has invaded my land, but there's really no hints who that could be or what that is. Yeah.
You were saying that the history thinks it's between a certain day and a certain day. Do we have any invasion clues in that time frame?
Well, we know, yeah. we know that, I mean, it's 500 years that they suggest it could fall in, and both the invasion of Assyria and the invasion and exile in Babylon happened in that 500 years. So it could be about either one of them or maybe somebody else.
Mhm.
But I think I think this, I wonder if, I'm assuming that the locust is not, is symbolic. Um, or maybe there's a famine. I don't, you know. So my book says the prophet calls for communal lamentation based on the impending threat of a plague of locusts that metaphorically describes an enemy invasion. So
Yeah.
I think it's probably, I mean, the way I read it, I think it's not necessarily actual locusts, but the devastation caused by invasion.
And it was complete.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can't help but think of Ukraine.
Right, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. There's just going to be little pieces of rubble left of that place.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's still, even though, like I said, it's sort of terrible, it's still very beautiful, these verses.
Yes.
That last verse, the vine withers, the fig tree droops, pomegranate, palm, and apple, all the trees of the field are dried up. Surely joy withers away among the people. It's sad, but it's poetic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think whether it's literal or figurative or some combination, all the connection to the harvest of the land being destroyed as a like a product of war. You know, that it's interesting, the rest of this chapter, you know, it talks, it's the stripped of their bark and thrown it down. It's not just, it's kind of almost like the locusts are echoing throughout the rest of this section, right?
Mhm.
Which is, but it's also saying a nation. So it's comparing the whole time the destruction of, in war, of locusts destroying, eating everything. Yeah. I remember my dad, I know locusts are like seasonal, like every X amount of years or whatever, oftentimes, but my dad, when he lived in La Junta, southern Colorado, it seemed like, maybe it wasn't all 4 years they lived there, but it seemed like every year there were a lot of locusts around, and they leave their little husks on the trees, and you know, they make lots of noise. Yeah, I have some interesting memories of that.
Mm.
Big bugs, they're huge, large, like that big. And when you see, you know, you think of like the plague of locusts, how, you know, millions of bugs that are this big going
Yeah.
through and eating everything green.
Yeah.
That is a pretty devastating thing. Okay, I'm going to continue reading unless someone has another comment or thought about any of this. Put on sackcloth and lament, you priests. Wail, you ministers of the altar. Come, pass the night in sackcloth, you ministers of my God. Grain offering and drink offering are withheld from the house of your God. Sanctify a fast, call a solemn assembly. Gather the elders and all the inhabitants of the land to the house of the Lord your God, and cry out to the Lord. Alas for the day of the Lord is near, and as destruction from the Almighty it comes. Is not the food cut off before our eyes, joy and gladness from the house of our God? The seed shrivels under the clods. The storehouses are desolate. The granaries are ruined because the grain has failed. How the animals groan. The herds of cattle wander about because there is no pasture for them. Even the flocks of sheep are dazed. To you, O Lord, I cry, for fire has devoured the pastures of the wilderness, and flames have burned all the trees of the field. Even the wild animals cry to you, because the water courses are dried up, and fire has devoured the pastures of the wilderness.
Sounds like total devastation.
Yeah, it's calling for fasting, for the priests and leaders to gather everyone together, crying out for help.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Do you,
I don't know why for me, but it's. What are you gonna say, Kalita?
I was just going to say, do we have any idea what precipitated this? Why they're lamenting? Why are they saying that it's destroyed? Is there a preface for this?
I mean, it sounds
Uh,
like an invasion of. I mean, it could be Assyria or Babylon invasion,
okay.
which we know kind of historically. But because there's no names that can identify us with us, can put us into a certain time frame, it's hard to say. Or it could be someone else.
Okay. It just seems like it's such a devastating incident, even if it's just not actually locust or, whatever. It's just there should be something that you could pinpoint it to or reference it to.
We know, like, if I had to guess, and I am not a. That's a local number, but I'm not going to answer right now. The we know a little bit about. There were some differences between the invasion of the Assyrian army and the Babylonian army. In many ways, the Assyrian army was more brutal and destroyed things, burned crops, that sort of thing. So that sounds a little bit like this. But it's not to say the Babylonians weren't. The Babylonians tore down the temple. So typically people sort of imply that the Assyrian thing was far more overall devastating to the people in the land. So
So it's not them turning away from God. It's more of an incident that happened and not.
well, yeah, but the prophets are always going to connect it to turning away from God.
Yeah.
That's part of what they do. This foreign land is invading you and killing everybody and destroying your crops, but it's because you've strayed from God. There's always going to be a little bit of that
Okay.
in the prophets. But yeah, it doesn't give quite enough to really know.
Yeah. That's what it's very evident.
Which is the other part of that, which makes it a little tricky, is it gives you just enough to feel like it's historical,
Mhm.
but from where, and that makes it harder for us to connect to today. It feels like reading about something that happened before. If I had to preach on this, it'd be tough because yeah, it's poetic, but it's a little harder to connect because it's just historical sounding enough that it feels like talking about something that happened in the past.
Right. Books we've talked about before, it was more about idol worship, and they had specific layers that they were talking about. This doesn't even have that point of reference.
Yeah, I mean, it's just about being destroyed. Yeah.
Yeah.
And not specific even reasons for it. Just
Yeah.
yeah. But still, I think incredibly poetic.
Mhm.
The whole way through. Yeah. Very visual. Everything's very visual. So blow the trumpet in Zion, sound the alarm on my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble. For the day of the Lord is coming, it is near. A day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick darkness, like blackness spread upon the mountains. A great and powerful army comes. Their like has never been from of old. nor will be again after them in ages to come. Fire devours in front of them, and behind them a flame burns. Before them the land is like the Garden of Eden, but after them a desolate wilderness, and nothing escapes them. They have the appearance of horses, and like war horses they charge. As with rumbling of chariots, they leap on the tops of mountains, like the cracking of a flame of fire devouring the stubble, like a powerful army drawn up for battle. Before them our peoples are in anguish, all faces grow pale. Like warriors they charge, like soldiers they scale the wall. Each keeps to its own course. They do not swerve from their paths. They do not jostle one another. Each keeps to its own tracks. They burst through the weapons and are not halted. They leap upon the city. They run upon the walls. They climb up into the houses. They enter through the windows like a thief. Wow.
Yeah.
One of my notes here says, no way has ever been discovered of stopping the ongoing rush of a locust horde. What if, I don't know, what if the enemy is the locusts? What if it is all about? It makes it, I don't know. Some of it sounds like, well, maybe they are talking about locusts, but then they talk about a nation, and then
Yeah.
yeah,
Depends on how you apply it to life as you know it.
yeah, disaster on some level, whether it's
Yes.
The earth quakes before them, the heavens tremble, the sun and the moon are darkened, and the stars withdraw their shining. The Lord utters his voice at the head of the army, his army, how vast is his host, numberless are those who obey his command. Truly the day of the Lord is great, terrible indeed, who can endure it? Yet even now, says the Lord, return to me with all your heart, with fasting, with weeping, and with mourning. Rend your hearts and not your clothing. Return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love, and relent in punishing.
Talk about a verse that-
Return to the Lord your
Yeah,
God,
yeah.
for he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love.
Yeah,
That's our gospel acclamation for Lent.
yeah, yeah.
Anyway, I think I said that last week. I'm like, almost everything we do is scriptural.
Yeah.
There's one of them right there. So, who knows whether he will not turn and relent and leave a blessing behind him, a grain offering and a drink offering for the Lord your God.
Mm-hmm.
Blow the trumpet in Zion, sanctify a fast, call a solemn assembly, gather the people, sanctify the congregation, assemble the aged, gather the children, even infants at the breast. Let the bridegroom leave his room and the bride her canopy. Between the vestibule and the altar, let the priests, the ministers of the people, weep. Let them say, spare your people, O Lord, and do not make your heritage a mockery, a byword among the nations. Why should it be said among the peoples, where is their God? We have heard lines like that last part, spare your people. Why should they say, why should they have to say, where's your God? We heard that in a couple other, where they feel like there's no one there for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
That verse 2, between the vestibule and the altar, sort of implies that the prophet knows how the temple is laid out. Whether the prophet is from Jerusalem or whatever, the prophet kind of is saying, is giving a description of how the temple works, so the prophet's familiar with the temple, which is interesting. Oh, like we have read some of these minor prophets are clearly not, are different in different sort of regions. So it may sort of identify with a prophet with the area around Jerusalem, possibly. So even the time, the verse 16, blow a trumpet in Zion, all of that is sort of hinting that it's calling the people to worship in in the temple. One of my notes says the prophet summons the people to a holy assembly in the temple so that they can appeal for protection to Yahweh. Yahweh responds that the people will have crops and deliverance from an oppressor who comes from the north. And then a later note, which I've said to you before, other than from Egypt, almost all of Israel's invasions came from the north. The Eastern Sea is the Persian Arabian Gulf. The Western Sea is the Mediterranean. So they're kind of, and also a lot of desert to the east. So most invasions came from the north. Egypt never, we don't have any history of Egypt invading from the south, but Egypt was basically in all this time the only power to the south. So the earth quakes before them, the heavens tremble, the sun and the moon are darkened, and the stars withdraw their shining. It's pretty. Then the Lord became jealous for his land and had pity on his people. In response to his people, the Lord said, I am sending you grain, wine, and oil, and you will be satisfied. I will no more make you a mockery among the nations. I will remove the northern army far from you and drive it into a parched and desolate land in its front into the eastern sea, its rear into the western sea. Its stench and foul smell will rise up. Surely he has done great things. Do not fear, O soil, be glad and rejoice, for the Lord has done great things. Do not fear, you animals of the field, for the pastures of the wilderness are green. The tree bears its fruit. The fig tree and vine give their full yield. O children of Zion, be glad and rejoice in the Lord your God, for he has given the early rain for your vindication. He has poured down for you abundant rain, the early and later rain as before. The threshing floors shall be full of grain, the vat shall overflow with wine and oil. I will repay you for the years that the swarming locust has eaten, the hopper, the destroyer, and the cutter, my great army which I sent against you. That's interesting. You shall eat in plenty and be satisfied, and praise the name of the Lord your God, who has dealt wondrously with you. And my people shall never again be put to shame. You shall know that I am in the midst of Israel, and that I, the Lord, am your God, and there is no other. And my people shall never again be put to shame. It's interesting, the theology that kind of comes throughout a lot of the Old Testament and the New Testament spots. That verse 25 is a very interesting verse. This army that has been invading was sent by God,
Yeah.
to test the people, right? And it's such a weird, I don't know, it's a weird thing. But now you're good, so I'm gonna make sure that everything flourishes, you know.
When you look at it that way, it sounds like God just changes his mind all the time.
Yeah. I think it's a strange theology that, but I mean, and yeah, I'm a pastor, so I have to suck it up, because there's a lot of places where it is where if people are punished, it's because, you know, if an army invades, it's because they've been morally corrupt or whatever, or they've been worshiping idols or whatever, and it's God trying to correct that behavior, right? Rather than just an army's invading. I just feel like that's a little bit of an echo of what we call prosperity gospel that still exists today.
Yeah.
And it bugs me a little bit, because then, you know, The extreme, of course, in the modern day is, I mentioned this in my sermon, was it just last week? You know, a child dies of cancer. Well,
Yeah.
so is that God? You know, I just refuse to believe that every bad thing that happens is God teaching us a lesson.
Yeah.
I just, yeah, I can't go there personally, but that was a lot of the theology of the Jews at this time, right?
That's mostly because people need for themselves to put the blame on something.
They need a reason, yeah. Why could this,
Yeah.
how could this possibly be happening to us?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's God punishing us for our evil ways.
Yeah.
Even if we're not going to stop doing bad things, but there'll be times of prosperity too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's I don't know. I struggle with that sort of thinking, but that's very common. That's very common thinking in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament. But there are some of it is in the New Testament too. So even some of the things that Jesus said, you could kind of say are lean into that kind of thinking. So I think it goes to this. I had a seminary professor at ILIF, the Methodist Seminary, say this about theodicy, about things that I did. This is one of the things I cut for my sermon on Sunday, by the way. I actually do cut things sometimes. He said, I can't believe that a God who is all powerful would allow bad things to happen. So this is him speaking. So in his mind, in his theology, God is either all powerful or all good, omnipotent or omnibenevolent, but can't be both.
Yeah.
And so, wow, then you're faced with, could our God not be all powerful or not choose to be all powerful? Or could our God not be all good and cause bad things to happen? That'll take you down a wormhole, right?
Yeah.
But they do seem to be a little, if our God is all good, then why, and all powerful, then why do bad things happen to good people?
Well, then it depends on how you define good.
Or how you define powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so he said the way he defined it is, I think God is powerful, but has set the world in motion to a certain degree and works as best as possible with what's left. But I cannot, if I have to choose one, I have to choose that God is all good, benevolent, but maybe not all powerful. And that's tricky. Right?
Well, but it gives us the free, the gift of free will. So
Yeah.
that's the unknown factor in all of it. How does he work with that?
Yeah.
With us being the way we are, we'll go down that path that's not good.
So these Jews didn't have that problem because for them, if bad things happen, God caused it.
Mm.
But I think that's tricky too.
Yeah.
Then you can, as I said in my sermon this last Sunday, you could lose faith in God. Why would God do this? There's no reason.
But he knows the full picture and we don't. He has everything already planned out.
Right.
And we have idea of why, because it could make something change down the road for someone else.
It's true. And I know for sure that's happened in my life. But I also think sometimes there's no reason.
Yeah, that we can discern.
Yeah. And sometimes you just sit with people and you say, this sucks.
Yeah.
I've said that to many people in many hospitals. This sucks and I have no answers.
Yeah.
So
that comes then to trust in God.
Yeah.
Right.
Stop worrying about all that stuff and just trust.
Mm-hmm.
For
which
sure.
isn't easy.
Related to that, and this is really related to the Bible study, I saw Kay on Tuesday, the day she had her surgery.
Oh, good.
And she wasn't in church, but I had referenced Gary and passing away, and she said she cried when I mentioned
Oh,
Gary passing away suddenly. And it's one of those things that we don't know
mm-hmm.
tomorrow will bring. And so this idea here in Joel that we God punishes us by taking people we love away. It just feels a little wrong, a little raw, but sometimes that's sometimes one of you said we have this need to be able to explain why things happen.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
Then verse 28, then afterwards I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions. Even on the male and female slaves in those days I will pour out my spirit. That should also be familiar.
Mhm.
Your sons and daughters will prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions.
Mhm.
So that is quoted in Hebrews.
Hmm.
And I'm going to go find it. Hebrews 3. What is it? Yeah, either it's misquote. I don't know what that it says. Hebrews chapter 3, verse 1 in Hebrews. I don't know. I think it's somewhere else also, but it may be. I think Paul quotes it somewhere, but I don't know if this is. Anyway, I will show portents in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire and columns of smoke. The sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. Then everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there shall be those who escape, as the Lord has said, and among the survivors shall be those whom the Lord calls. For then in those days and at that time, when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley at Jehoshaphat. And I will enter into judgment with them there on account of my people and my heritage Israel, because they have scattered them among the nations. They have divided my land and cast lots for my people and traded boys for prostitutes and sold girls for wine and drunk it down. What are you to me, O Tyre and Sidon and all the regions of Philistia? Are you paying me back for something? If you are paying me back, I will turn your deeds back upon your own head swiftly and speedily. For you have taken my silver and my gold and have carried my rich treasures into your temples. You have sold the people of Judah and Jerusalem to the Greeks, removing them far from their own border. But now I will rouse them to leave the places to which you have sold them, and I will turn your deeds back upon your own heads. I will sell your sons and your daughters into the hands of the people of Judah, and I will sell them to the Sabaeans, to a nation far away, for the Lord has spoken.
Oh.
I can't deny that I kind of find it fun that the word Jehoshaphat was in there. So
Yeah.
I don't know why I never thought that was a biblical term, but now I know. Jehoshaphat, jump in Jehoshaphat. Now I wonder if that's like if I don't know. Now is jump in Jehoshaphat a biblical reference? I don't know. It's a valley name for an early Judean king, Jehoshaphat. It's kind of fun to say too.
Yes, it is.
And I get to say it again in the title of the next section. I think I was going to finish, but we have time for me to finish. There are a couple references here, not historical so much, but some place references here. Tyre and Sidon is often mentioned, which are non-Jewish areas that are sort of not far away. That are often sort of listed as enemies or opposing forces of the people. Philistia, the Philistines, Palestine, right, are the Canaanites that were there before the Jews. So they sort of live together, but they're sort of not together. They lived in the same sort of area, but they're sort of enemies. Yeah. And interesting, this reference to selling. You have taken away our children and sold them into slavery and sold them for wine and prostitutes. But now we're going to take your children away and sell them to a place far away where you'll never see them again. Sounds like what we call a pissing contest. Like I'm gonna do you one worse.
Yeah. Doesn't sound like a Christian way to go.
No, but these people aren't Christian.
That's true.
An eye for an eye.
Yeah. An eye for the eye makes the whole world blind, but that's kind of how that feels, right? Judgment in the valley of Jehoshaphat. See, I got to say it again. Proclaim this among the nations, prepare war, stir up the warriors, let all the soldiers draw near, let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weakling say, I am a warrior. How many quotable things are in this book? We had the that we've heard before. Your sons and your daughters will prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, the young men shall see visions. Return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger. There's lots of stuff here that we hear in other places. The beating your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears, of course. Which is, if you think about it, backwards from what we read. I think it's in Isaiah.
Yeah.
Beat your swords into plowshares.
Right.
And your spears into pruning hooks. This is the other way around.
Yeah.
So it's almost ironic that it's that way. We do hear that in a few other places. I think Isaiah, I'm looking to see. Micah. Micah and Isaiah. So come quickly, all you nations all around, gather yourselves there, bring down your warriors, O Lord. Let the nations rouse themselves and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat. I'm sorry, I just love saying it. For there I will sit to judge all the neighboring nations. Put in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Go in, tread, for the winepress is full. The vats overflow, for their wickedness is great. Multitudes in the valley of decision. For the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. The sun and the moon are darkened, and the stars withdraw their shining. The Lord roars from Zion and utters his voice from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth shake. But the Lord is a refuge for his people, a stronghold for the people of Israel. So you shall know that I, the Lord your God, dwell in Zion, my holy mountain, and Jerusalem shall be holy, and strangers shall never again pass through it. And that day the mountains shall drip sweet wine, the hills shall flow with milk, and all the stream beds of Judah shall flow with water. A fountain shall come forth from the house of the Lord, and water the Wadi Shittim. Egypt shall become a desolation, and Edom a desolate wilderness, because of the violence done to the people of Judah, in whose land they have shed innocent blood. But Judah shall be inhabited forever, and Jerusalem to all generations. I will avenge their blood, and I will not clear the guilty, for the Lord dwells in Zion.
Okay, I have to ask the obvious question. What is Wadi Shittim?
Sounds like swear word.
I know.
Verse 18. A place in Moab where the people sinned. That sin will be overcome by this water.
That wasn't as dramatic as it seemed.
You were hoping for more?
I could see a war or something like that.
It says the end is this ideal utopian ending. The passage starts with in that day verse, matching themes of the ends of other prophetic books like Amos, Hosea, Micah, Zephaniah, Isaiah. Wine and milk and water are symbolic of the flourishing of the people. which are all mentioned. Yeah. There's also this that God's house is in Zion, in Jerusalem. It makes me feel, I'm sure if I really, sometimes I think, I hope nobody else ever watches these things, because I probably am saying things that are just totally untrue, and because I don't know what I'm talking about. It feels to me that the temple hasn't been destroyed. With some of there were a couple places in there that they sort of reference the temple, and there's nothing about it being destroyed.
Right.
But yet, my book says, well, anywhere from 900 to 400 BC, which if it's 400, that's at least 100 years after the destruction of the temple.
Yeah.
So if I'm a biblical scholar, I mean, I am, but not in the way that, not like a real biblical scholar. I wouldn't put it after the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians.
Yeah. Yeah.
That seems, and that's, the 6th century BC. They say up to 4th, because there's at least 3 different references to the temple, and there's nothing about it that says the temple is destroyed, including the last one, which says that God resides in the temple,
Yeah.
in Jerusalem. Well, there was some doubt about that when it was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586. So
Yeah.
I would assume that this was written before that. But whoever wrote the preface to this probably has a doctorate and knows more than me. So
Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it shouldn't matter to us. Just
well, yeah,
time it.
yeah, I do think I do think the Jews' sort of insistence at this time of God isn't everywhere, God's just in this specific place in the temple.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of theology ended up being very healthy for early Christianity, only because when the temple is finally destroyed a second time in 70 AD, the Jewish people say, we kind of believed all along that God was everywhere, but now we're forced to really dig into that God is everywhere, not just in this holy place. So we talk about that we worship our buildings now. Imagine how much they worship their building then, right? If this is literally God's house, literally where God sits and reigns, and nowhere else, it changes your whole way of thinking, when then your faith changes to where God is everywhere and in everything. Even if they said that, and they do say that even well before the temple is even built, they sort of, I'm not going to say contradict themselves, but they sort of have 2 narratives. Well, God's everywhere, but God's really in this place, in this house. That you kind of read that in the Old Testament. So you're right. Does it really matter? No, but also I think it was a healthy way for Christianity to sort of develop and flourish, because it was largely, obviously, built up by Jews. If God is only in that house, which is only for the Jews,
Yeah.
then how could God be for the Christians at all?
Mm-hmm.
Even if the Christians are largely, at least a lot of the early ones were historically, culturally Jewish. So it was almost like the temple had to be destroyed for Christianity to. That's one of the elements that had to happen for Christianity to be able to grow.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm just throwing that out as a thought, because it's kind. Even other world faiths don't have that kind of narrative that this is literally God's house. God is here more than anywhere else. And so, but we have shadows of that now. People still worship buildings.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, when we were out in the parking lot, people said, well, I know God's not in there, but it just feels like what's more holy in there.
Yeah.
And I get it. The way I like to say it is, it's not that God is more inside the sanctuary than in the parking lot, but the space helps us focus on God.
Yeah.
God is not more in the building than in the parking lot, but having the space, the cross, the altar, those things that help us focus our attention.
Mhm.
It's not about where God is, it's about us being culturally attention deficit.
Yeah.
But well, thank you. We got through the whole book and it's only 11 now.
How about that?
Very good.
I didn't think we were gonna, but maybe I'm a fast reader. I don't know.
Yes.
Let's have a little prayer and we will end this. Dear Lord, thank you for your prophet Joel, who faced an uncertain and difficult time that we don't know a whole lot about now, but also reminded us and reminded the people of that time that God will still stand with us in those times of trouble and will rebuild when we believe that all is lost, and give us courage and strength to move forward. All this in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.